Welcome to the Battle of the Presidents, where we will learn about the first 5 presidents and then decide who is the best. I'm Mr. Klein here with Mr. Mitchell, and we'll be walking through the presidency of George Washington in this episode. You might know that George Washington was the leader of the Continental Army in victory over the British in the American Revolution, and most people also know that he was the first president of the United States. Washington was born on February 22, 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia. In his early life, he was a surveyor, farmer, soldier, politician, and statesman. He was descended from English royalty and became one of the richest men in America at that time. He got started in the military by fighting in the French and Indian War, which gave him the experience to eventually be named commander of the Continental Army during the American Revolution.
Americans believed in George Washington. They saw him as an honest leader and a hero of the Revolution. Many believed he should be the first U.S. president. Washington had been looking forward to retirement and a quiet life on his Virginia farm. When he hesitated at becoming a candidate for the presidency, his friends convinced him to run. In January of 1789, the Electoral College selected Washington unanimously, and John Adams became his vice president. Hard work lay ahead for members of the new government. The new federal government had to create policies and procedures that would determine the future of the country. As President Washington noted in a letter to James Madison, "The first of everything in our situation will serve to establish a precedent." A precedent is an action or decision that later serves as an example. And that is exactly what the presidency of Washington did, was by setting a precedent in everything that it did. One example of this precedent was the creation of cabinet members. The first Congress created departments in the executive branch for different areas of national policy. Washington met with the department heads, or cabinet members, who advised him. For 2 of the most important cabinet positions, Washington chose carefully. He picked Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. It's almost like Washington was getting ready for some epic cabinet rap battles.
Another aspect of the new government that had to be set was the federal court system. To set up the federal court system in the court's location, Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1789. This act created 3 levels of federal courts and defined their powers and relationship to the state courts. It set up the federal district courts and circuit courts of appeals. The president nominated candidates for federal judgeships as well. Those candidates then had to be approved or rejected by the Senate. The basic parts of the federal government were now in place. Leaders began to face challenges of the new nation.
One of the biggest challenges at the inception of the United States was paying off the national debt, money owed by the United States from the Revolutionary War. In steps Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, who was a founding father. Without a father, got a lot further by working a lot harder, by being a self-starter. My bad, I got off on a Hamilton musical moment. The United States owed about $11.7 million to foreign countries and about $40.4 million to the United States citizens. During the war, the government raised money with bonds. Bonds are certificates of debt that carry a promise to buy back the bonds at a higher price.
Hamilton decided to tackle the financial issue with his comprehensive economic plan. Hamilton wanted to deal with the debt by taking on the foreign and domestic debt by replacing creditors' old, low-value bonds with new, interest-bearing bonds. Second, Hamilton wanted to take over most of the state's $25 million Revolutionary War debt. Obviously, this wasn't popular with everyone because the South did not want to help the federal government pay the debts of other states. Remember, most of the Revolutionary War was fought in the North, meaning they had more of the debt than the South did. Hamilton knew that he needed the help of the Southern representatives to get his plan approved.
Hamilton also knew that he had something to bargain with. Southern officials wanted to change the location of the nation's capital. Remember, at this time, the nation's capital was located in New York City, the greatest city in the world! Work! My bad. Another Hamilton musical moment. Many Southerners thought that having the capital in New York gave the northern states too much influence over national policy. So a deal was made to convince the northern members of Congress to move the capital in exchange for support in the South for Hamilton's debt plan. This is the reason that the nation's capital is located in Washington, D.C. today, which is between the states of Maryland and Virginia.
Another aspect of Hamilton's financial plan was to start a national bank where the government could safely deposit its money. The bank would also make loans to the government and businesses. Hamilton also thought that the United States should build a national mint, a place to make coins. Then the country could begin issuing its own money. Although this wasn't a popular idea because some people thought it gave the United States too much power, Jefferson and Madison also thought the U.S. Constitution did not give Congress the power to create a bank, but Hamilton quoted the Elastic Clause, which states that Congress can make all laws which shall be necessary and proper to govern the nation. Hamilton declared that the clause allowed the government to create a national bank. Hamilton believed in the loose construction of the Constitution. Loose construction means that the federal government can take reasonable actions that the Constitution does not specifically forbid.
Jefferson thought that the Elastic Clause should be used only in special cases. He wrote to President Washington, "The Constitution allows only the means which are necessary, not those which are merely convenient." Jefferson believed in the strict construction of the Constitution. People who favor strict construction think that the federal government should do only what the Constitution specifically says it can do.
President Washington and Congress agreed with Hamilton. They hoped a bank would offer stability for the U.S. economy. In February of 1791, Congress enacted the Charter for the Bank of the United States, the country's first national bank. The bank played an important role in making the economy more stable. In other words, the U.S. found a way to make it rain.
Creating a new stable and functioning government is hard enough on its own, but the world still goes on and there is still tension and conflict abroad and at home. The French Revolution is happening over in France as we are starting out as our own country. A few years after the French Revolution started, France and Great Britain went to war. Some Americans supported the French because they supported us during the American Revolutionary War, while others backed the British. And some wanted to remain neutral. The debate divided Congress and Washington's cabinet, but Washington presented to Congress that we should remain neutral. This neutrality proclamation stated that the United States would not take sides with any European country that was at war. Washington believed his plan was the safest for the long run, even though some people disagreed with him.
Other conflicts occurred on the frontier in the United States. Congress passed a tax on American-made whiskey in March of 1791. The tax was part of Hamilton's plan to raise money to help pay for the federal debt. People in areas such as western Pennsylvania were bitter about the tax. They were already angry with the federal government, which they believed did not protect them from Native American attacks and did not allow settlers enough opportunities for trade. The farmers' corn crops were often made into whiskey, which was easier to transport than the corn. Because cash was rare, whiskey became like money in the region. The farmers believed that the tax was aimed specifically at them.
The complaints of western Pennsylvanians were at first expressed peacefully, but by 1794, the fighting had broken out in what became known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Farmers lashed out against the tax on whiskey. Protesters refused to pay the tax. Incidents of violence spread to other states. President Washington feared that the rebels threatened the federal government's authority. Washington declared that he could no longer remain a passive spectator in this event. He personally led the army in military action against the rebellion, the first and only time an American president has done so. The army of about 13,000 men approached western Pennsylvania in November 1794. By this time, most of the rebels had fled. The Whiskey Rebellion ended without a battle and proved that the new Constitution was strong, unlike the Articles of Confederation.
Those are the highlights of the major events that took place while Washington was president. So it's obvious that he should be remembered for more than just being our first president and that he had false teeth. His leadership set a precedent for all future presidents to come and gave the United States a good fighting start. So where do you think that Washington stacks up against the other presidents? Join us next time where we take an in-depth look at our second president, John Adams, in Battle of the Presidents.